Hey, it's Motley Fool Tech Weekly. I'm Chris Hill here with Lyons George and Eric Bleeker. Let's talk about Apple and the iWatch. You know, we've seen these breadcrumbs that Apple's working on the iWatch, and this week it wasn't a breadcrumb so much as a loaf of bread in the fact that Apple comes out and they register the trademark for the word iWatch in Japan. I mean, it's just a matter of when. When is this thing coming, and what is it going to do for their business?
Yeah, it does seem like a matter of when, and the headline you see and the kind of narrative is, will a watch be able to save Apple? Which is silly, right? Because I'll leave it to Wall Street analysts to say, you can sell this percent of iPhones and with this gross margin and it adds 38 cents of EPS a year.
And that's how they sound.
That's how they sound. That is how they sound. But the real thing isn't necessarily modeling something like this out in its direct effect to Apple's business. I think you have to start thinking about all these different complementary areas. You know, we've talked in the past about iOS in the car and coming out really aggressively with manufacturers there. Apple TV, whatever form it takes, right now it's a little box that they've got 13 million units on, and some like an iWatch, and it's just a bunch of complementary products to iOS. So, you know, you are buying an iPad and an iPhone. So even if it's not a huge direct success to the bottom line, the larger theme is Apple kind of building out all these complementary areas that keep people engaged within, you know, its platform. And not only that, but throw some additional profits to the bottom line. Now, again, can it change Apple? It's $170 billion in sales a year. I mean, an iWatch probably isn't going to be fundamentally changing to the business in any way. But I think if you're looking at the, you know, counter narrative to what's going on in the media, that Apple's basically building out this powerful array of different devices that entrench people in iOS, I think there's something far more important and powerful there.
Are you going to buy one? Because I don't wear a watch. I'm unlikely to buy a device like this. You have a very nice timepiece on your wrist there. And, I mean, are you going to trade that in for an iWatch?
Yeah, I don't think so. Not anytime soon. I'm a big fan of Swiss-made watches, you know, and the word on the street is that Apple makes everything over in China, although maybe back in America one day. No, you know, it's interesting. I agree. You know, the iWatch would be sort of, it wouldn't really be transformative to Apple's bottom line. It would just be sort of another sort of tool in that iOS tool belt, sort of making people reliant on that ecosystem. But I disagree that it's inevitable at this point. You know, I mean, I know that they filed for the iWatch name in Japan. They also recently filed a patent for a disappearing bezel. The bezel is like the little sort of metal rim around an iPhone, and so they want a watch, I guess, where the border can become screen when it needs to be, and then be border when it needs to be. So I guess clearly they're making something down there in the Apple R&D labs. But if you look at what Tim Cook said at the All Things D11 conference, the Wall Street Journal's annual tech conference, he said, you know, I don't see any way. He says basically watches aren't very popular with kids, watches and bands, and he was answering broadly about wearable tech. And he was saying sort of those kind of accessories aren't very popular with kids right now, and I don't see how any one product could convince a kid who'd never worn a smart band before that now is the time to start wearing bands, you know, or never worn a watch that now is the time to start wearing watches. And if you look at Apple's history, traditionally they're innovators, but they're not first movers. They're going to let someone else come to market and prove out an idea before they really put their name behind it. So I think if you look at what they're doing now, they're letting Sony just released its second iteration of its smartwatch. You have the Pebble, which is this Kickstarter sort of crowd-funded smartwatch that's on the market. If Apple does come out full force with an iWatch, it's not going to be until competitors have already done the same. So I actually think we're at least 2 or 3 years out. At least I'd say we're 3 years out from an iWatch.
Do you think Google or Samsung, or God forbid, even a Microsoft comes out first?
Well, I think they will come out first. Do I think it will be successful? Probably not. You know, it's just these platforms don't have the same level of engagement, and I think you see a rush that anytime there's a report about Apple doing something, everyone else rushes to do it. But, you know, Android's just a different beast in some ways than Apple. And I think people will rush out to do a Samsung, watch and everything. But again, Android was successful in many ways because Apple came out first. iPhones are expensive. They have limited agreements with carriers, and Android was able to hit a variety of price points. I think Android in some way functions better as if Apple does do this and is successful, you can hit different price points. You can see how people are using a device, and so many people have Android phones get to sync up well. So I think they'll come out with these. I don't know if they'll be successful, but I don't think that's a black mark on Apple being necessarily successful with it.
Let's move over to entertainment and reports of Apple teaming up with Time Warner, a content deal. How does Apple really differentiate itself in this space, though? Because a lot of people are looking to partner up with Time Warner.
Yeah, and we recently saw Microsoft signing its own deal with Time Warner reportedly, and this is all reports, so by the time you see this video it might be done, but looks very solid. I think the key, what you had mentioned, was doing these kind of piecemeal additions. Apple TV just got HBO Go. Cool. HBO Go has been available on all the other platforms previously. It got Watch ESPN. Cool. I don't think that, the path to huge success is necessarily in these deals itself. And at some point, the defining thing will be what Apple wants to do with putting apps themselves on the television and making the television a platform that people can actually develop for. But, you look at these kinds of content deals, and clearly Apple just hired a Hulu executive, which has had a ton of partnerships with these companies, and they're trying to do something different around television, but I don't think necessarily anyone wants to play ball for them. And the cost of Apple to play ball in some of these fields, you saw them recently signing a deal, iTunes Radio, their deal is ostensibly higher than Pandora, and I think that's partially because none of these media companies want Apple to come and bully them around, and they're terrified that anything that Apple does that changes the way we experience television would be potentially destructive to their model.
Eric mentioned Pete Distad, the executive from Hulu, ostensibly. He's going to come in and help them secure these deals. But you look over the last couple of years, Lions, and we had Amazon with Amazon Prime and Netflix sort of making land grabs for content, but then Netflix sort of breaks out with the original content, House of Cards, that sort of thing. Does Apple need to at least consider that move, going the route of original content, if for no other reason than it gets people talking about a specific reason to latch on to Apple TV?
I mean, to answer your question, I'm sure someone at Apple already has considered that move. Now, the real question is would that be a shrewd path for them to follow? Frankly, I don't think so. I think if you look at what Apple does right now, which is manufacture cool devices that people like to keep in their pockets and on their desks, that is so far afield from creative content production. Now, everyone talks about House of Cards for Netflix, how that's been a successful. There's also just been, what was the gangster series, Lilyhammer, that came out. It was just an absolute mess, and now Amazon is sort of doing this. So they have like 7 different shows, and they're letting the people pick which ones get to keep going. That sounds a bit gimmicky to me, and frankly, I think content creation, when you have all these companies that are tech companies, they're content delivery platforms or original equipment manufacturers. I think the idea that they can just say, okay, now we hire someone from Hulu, and they're going to come in and create hit television shows, and Apple or Netflix or Amazon is going to be the new HBO.
You're skeptical.
I'm a little bit skeptical, to be perfectly frank.
Sounds like you're a lot skeptical.
I think there's a little bit of there's more than a little bit of art to making a truly catchy, gripping television. Whatever form, comedies, dramas. But I don't think The Wire comes out of a corporate merger. It comes out of a good writing team. So, long story short, I hope Apple doesn't go in that direction.
Man, worth noting too, Amazon, for all their investment in recent studies, has 2% streaming share, and Netflix is at about 90% or thereabouts. And it's just because it's marketing. If I said to you, name the difference in shows between Amazon and Netflix, most people probably couldn't do that. They make it very opaque to be able to see what their programming is relative, and that's just because over the years they've built up that they have this, perception of quality, and people, when they sign up for Amazon, don't even really think about. So you can end up spending a ton on content and get very low benefit out of it, as Amazon is doing right now.
If nothing else, does the hiring of Pete Distad from Hulu, does that signal a greater sense of ambition on the part of Apple, a greater level of seriousness that, yes, we are really going to be a player when it comes to television?
Well, I think they want to explore all options and how to do it. I think, if you thought about how Apple would want to do something, it would be just plug basically one cable into a television to run everything. And that's so difficult to do with what's entrenched in the media industry. And they're not going to be able to do that, but I think they're open to all avenues. And getting an industry insider is going to give you a little more clout.
For a couple of years now, for many companies, Europe has been a challenge. How big a challenge is it for Apple? Because the latest numbers coming out of Europe for Apple are not necessarily all that encouraging.
Yeah, and I've got them in front of me. They're from Kantar, which is a company that measures market share. And just reading, let's look at Spain right now. Its market share in Spain is at about 4.2%. Android there, 92.5%. And Italy, last year they were at 20%. Now they're at 14.8%. So I think this actually opens up an interesting discussion that people talk about an iPhone Lite, and it's always referenced in regards to emerging markets. Hey, that's where the growth is. But you look at these numbers in some of these markets where subsidies aren't as strong. I was putzing around Vodafone Italy's site the other day, and it's a non-subsidy model. You're going to have to pay up front a lot for a phone, and if your offering starts at an iPhone, which the iPhone 5 began at 729 euros.
Good Lord.
That's a lot of money to pay.
A lot of money.
And you can go direct through Apple for something like iPhone 4, but that's a 2+ year old model, and that starts at 429 euros. So you start looking at maybe an iPhone Lite being a play not just for these emerging markets, but for a place like Europe, where Apple's market share in Europe is actually lower than its urban China market share. That's a mind-blowing stat to me. If you have told me that 5 years ago, I would have told you to shut up, because there's no way I would have thought that was ever possible. So there's this duality in Apple right now where America doing fantastic, over 40% market share. Europe fading. China doing well in the markets that they can do well in. And it just, again, all leads to this thing of an iPhone Lite. There's an appeal and there's a price gap to be filled, not just over in China and India. There's also one to be filled in Europe.
How much longer can they keep seeing numbers like this coming out of Europe before they make some sort of dramatic move, whether it's the low-cost iPhone or something else?
Oh, I don't think they're going to wait more than a year to come out with the low-end iPhone at maybe a $99 price point, for the whole kit and caboodle. There's a reason we've been hearing that rumor for about a year now. Industry commentators have been noticing that Europe, especially countries like Spain, Italy, Greece, has actually been a place of a relatively safe place for these struggling smartphone manufacturers. For instance, BlackBerry actually is incredibly popular and doing very well with sort of the 17 to 30-year-old young adult crowd, young unemployed crowd in Europe right now. And so signals like that sort of telegraph the fact that, hey, $700 smartphones just aren't going to be par for the course here anymore. People are using smartphones. The market's there, but it's not there at the high end like it used to be. And Apple's not stupid, so if they're aware of their share, they're aware of the price point they need to put a device out at if they want to bring that number up, and the rumors are there that they're going to bring that product out.
You think this is the biggest problem Apple is facing right now?
Yeah, the biggest problem is size, $170 billion company, and addressable market at the high end. And, Lyons mentioned $100. I don't think it could go that cheap because you can't make a good smartphone for $100. I mean, you can see Android things going at that sub, but I mean, with the margins Apple's going to need to maintain, I think people would want to keep their expectations at that $300 or $400 level. Somewhere, it's not going to be super cheap, but again, it just fills a very logical gap in their programming, because right now you're only offering, if you're in Europe again, 429 euros for a phone that's several years old. It's it's just missing a very wide target audience.
All right, for Eric Bleeker and Lions George, I'm Chris Hill. We'll see you next time.